Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm Bob Clay. Welcome to Alaska Weather. Let's move right into the show here. Well, first of all, we'll start with the infrared satellite picture and we'll just kind of set it in motion here. I'll just kind of move on the way. We'll just kind of start off towards the east. There's a weak low pressure center which is over near Haida Gwaii, kind of moving north. There's a little band of clouds. I didn't see much in the way of any kind of precipitation or anything in southeast Alaska. Interior sections, a few clouds, but really not much. A lot of the pretty much high cloudiness. There's some low cloudiness along the coast here up towards the Arctic coast and the Beaufort Sea coast there. And this kind of, there we go, got it in motion there. So, but you see we had a few breaks over the interior sections. And let's take a look now at our visible satellite imagery. And pretty much we'll kind of set this in motion. It kind of wiggles a little bit, but you can see the Alaska Range there and the Wrangell, so pretty nice over South Central for the most part. A few clouds over the interior sections. I'm kind of hogging up the east here. Let's move a little bit, look at a little bit further out to the west there. And basically, we can see some of the higher clouds as this thing kind of gets in motion here. As we see the higher clouds moving in advance of this next big storm system, which is going to be impacting the Aleutian chain and most of the eastern and southern Bering Sea over the next day or so. Also, you can see some snow shower activity right over towards the eastern Aleutians there, and we had some snow showers reported over in Cold Bay today. Okay, this is kind of bring up the first map here, and this is the satellite imagery with the fronts kind of overlaid. You can see a weakening occlusion kind of extending across the Bering Sea down to another weaker low, which is over in the western portion of the Bristol Bay. And like I said, we had some snow showers out over the eastern, over towards Unalaska, and also some rain and snow showers in towards the Cold Bay area. Generally, fair skies for the most part over the interior sections, as we saw on the previous loop. So we did have some clouds and some low clouds and fog up along the Arctic coast. And I forgot to mention, we also had some over down along the southwest coast there. Over the Gulf there, pretty much in pretty good shape. We've had this weak low pressure center, which has been kind of working its way towards Kodiak, pushing a few clouds that way, but as when I left for the studio here, we hadn't had any showers yet, but we are expecting some rain and snow showers to kind of filter in there through tonight. And over in southeast Alaska, for the most part, cloudy conditions over the southern end. We did have some clouds earlier over the northern end, but those have since broken up. And over towards Haida Gwaii, it looks like some rain showers over in that area. Now, our forecast for tonight, we're expecting pretty much the clouds kind of staying over the southern portion of the Panhandle, not really expecting much in the way of any precipitation down in that area. Over the mainland areas, generally look for fair skies for the most part. We will have some rain and snow showers kind of moving in with this trough moving in from the east over towards Kodiak Island, rain and snow showers, but again, shouldn't be of any real consequence, just some nuisance showers. Up along the Arctic coast, generally cloudy conditions with that ridge kind of hanging over the Arctic Ocean there. So basically, we're going to be looking for onshore flow and just low clouds, fog, and probably a few flurries up along the Arctic coast. Southwest Alaska and some of the western interior sections will see patchy fog, and particularly along the coastal areas of southwest Alaska all the way up to Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula, as well as St. Lawrence Island. Look for widespread pretty much fog and some flurries in those areas. St. Lawrence Island may have more in the way of some more steady light snow or flurries associated with a weak trough moving through that area. Now here's the big storm we saw in the satellite picture. Now that's starting to work its way north. Going to bring some very windy conditions to the central and the western Aleutian Islands, and also looks like the precipitation will be a mixture of rain and snow as the air slowly starts to warm throughout the night. And most of the rain should be south of the warm front, well south of the chain. Again, rain and snow expected over with some very windy conditions along the central and western Aleutian Islands. Now, as we get in towards Sunday's forecast, the low pressure continues to move north. We'll get the warm air now moving north. So basically, the western and I should say the central portion of the Aleutians in the green there, generally will be some rain showers on the backside. We'll still be looking for some snow and rain mixed over the western Aleutians. And you can see the rain and snow is going to work its way over towards Unalaska and just right maybe towards False Pass as we get towards the afternoon hours tomorrow. And generally, we'll see some cloud cover, low clouds continue along the southwest coast tomorrow. And those will probably break up a little bit as the flow becomes more easterly through tomorrow night. But anyway, up until through the afternoon hours, look for some patchy fog. Patchy fog and flurries, few places in the interior sections during the morning hours. Cloudy conditions continuing along the Arctic coast with some flurries with the high pressure continuing in that area. And we'll see some mostly cloudy conditions over the southern portion of the Panhandle. Maybe a rain shower or so, but the northern and central sections of the Panhandle should be in pretty good shape. And Kodiak Island with the northwest, onset of the northwest flow should see some quite a few breaks and some sunny weather through tomorrow. Now on Monday, we'll see, look like probably the central and the southern end of the Panhandle, maybe some partly to mostly cloudy conditions. The northern section should be pretty much sunny. Over the interior sections, generally, except for a few clouds and maybe a little patchy fog here and there, generally should be for the most part sunny. Along the Arctic coast, we'll look for cloudy conditions, probably a little fog still in there, and I didn't actually put that in there, but look for some fog along the Arctic and the Beaufort Sea coast there. Now, we're starting to be pushing this front further off to the north and east. So along the Bristol Bay coast there, along the western capes, we're going to probably see snow and blowing snow conditions with some very windy conditions. Just south of there along the central Alaska Peninsula, we're going to be seeing a mixture of rain and snow. And then kind of south of there, all in the green, there'll be pretty much rain showers that way. And as we get further off to the west, over towards the western Aleutians there, look for a mixture of rain and snow. Could turn to snow for a little while with the northerly flows if we get enough cold air kind of wrapping it back in there. And that's it for this portion of the surface maps here. We'll kind of look for the temperatures around the state today. And you know what? I'm kind of standing on the wrong side. So we'll move over here. Generally 40s over the Panhandle today, 40s to 30s along the Arctic, or I should say this is as of 2 p.m. today. Along the Gulf coastal, 20s in the Copper River Basin, 30s in south central Alaska. Let's move a little bit further north now. And generally in the interior sections as of 2 p.m. we had 20s there, some minus numbers over towards Dead Horse, Barter Island, and then as you get along the Arctic coast, generally single digits we're in that area. Generally down over towards southwest Alaska, generally in the 20s for the most part. Move a little further south now over into Bristol Bay, 20s to 30s, some 30s to 40s along the Alaska Peninsula, 30s along the Aleutians and pretty much along the Aleutians, and in the 30s also in the Pribilof Islands. Now let's see what we're expecting for our lows tonight. Well, generally we're going to see some minus numbers, single digits to maybe minus 10 up along the Arctic coast. And over the interior sections, probably some minus numbers for the most part, minus single digits. And also in the Copper River Basin, we'll generally see along the coastal areas in southeast Alaska, generally in the 30s. And you really can't see it because this map is kind of squished south here. But generally, we'll be looking for 30s along the Alaska Peninsula and along the Aleutian Islands. Now, as we get in towards our highs for tomorrow, generally we're going to be looking at some 40s as we get in southeast Alaska, and along the North Gulf Coast, 30s to 40s. We'll see some 30s over the interior sections. And as we get further north here along the Arctic coast, some single digits for the most part, 30s to 20s over in southwest Alaska. And we'll see 30s along the Alaska Peninsula, 40s over the central Aleutians, which you can't see, and then we'll see some upper 30s over along the western Aleutian Islands. Now, let's take a look at what we're having for flying weather for tomorrow. Well, as you kind of guessed, generally with that ridge of high pressure continuing onshore flow up along the Arctic coast, look for some widespread IFR along the coastal areas. Some spotty marginal VFR conditions over in the interior sections, and we'll see some IFR widespread along the coastal areas of southwest Alaska tomorrow. And as that front kind of works its way up, we're going to see a large ribbon along the Aleutians there, and probably just south of there with some IFR conditions in a wide area of marginal VFR stretching all the way to the east towards the western Alaska Peninsula for tomorrow afternoon. Now, our past conditions. Well, Anaktuvuk should be VFR, Atigun as well, and then now moving south along the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill, look for VFR conditions. VFR conditions also at rainy, windy, and Isabel and Tanita, Portage, and Chilkoot and White Pass should see some VFR conditions. At Chilkoot and White Pass, look for some gusty northerly winds, so there will be some turbulence as you go through those passes for today and for tomorrow. Okay, now let's look for tomorrow's freezing levels, and generally up near Haida Gwaii about 4,000 feet, and just to southern end of Panhandle about 2,000 feet. And you see the warm air kind of starting to work its way up with that frontal system, 2,000 feet, just south of the Aleutians, bumping up to 6,000 to 8,000 feet below that. And you can see this white area here kind of right at the surface there. And now let's take a look at, well, come on here. Okay, well, I'm going to click it again to see what happens. There we go. Okay, icing up to 15,000 feet along the Aleutians associated with that frontal system there. Here's a jet stream, generally 120 knots, kind of diving across the Alaska Peninsula, and then south of the Gulf there, 110 knots southerly wind as you move over towards the central Aleutians. Winds aloft, generally light winds over the interior sections. You can see some stronger winds associated with the low there, about 9,000 feet, about 60 knots or so, just to the north of it, 45 to 50 knots off to the east of it. And then as you get down to 3,000 feet, generally you see the winds 40 to 70 knots to the east of the center, north of the center about 70 knots, and probably 40 to 50 knots to the west of the center. You see the ridge of high pressure kind of extending across southwest Alaska, and then kind of a return, kind of a southeasterly flow over in southeast Alaska for tomorrow. Now, let's look at our turbulence conditions around the state. We'll start over towards southeast, and generally just with the ridge of high pressure kind of over the Yukon, over the mainland, and the low pressure over the Gulf there is causing the pressure gradients to really build, and we've got some pretty strong northerly winds kind of coming through the gaps there in the northern and central portion of the Panhandle. So look for some moderate turbulence up to or below about 2,000 feet. And then we've also got some turbulence, as you can expect, associated with those strong winds with the approach of that next storm system. We'll look for some isolated severe turbulence along the Aleutians. That'll be below about 3,000 feet or so. And then a widespread of moderate turbulence up to about 12,000 feet. Well, that concludes this portion of the show. You will see you next with the marine section.
Welcome to the land of 10,000 smokes, a remote location within Katmai National Park in Alaska. 1 century ago, a volcano erupted here with such fury that it leveled a 40-square-mile area. And evidence of that volcano resides today in these walls of volcanic ash, 80 feet high. The volcanic eruption was so powerful, it altered the world's weather.
The ash cloud blocks sunlight to the lower 48, producing an unseasonably cool summer almost from coast to coast. The historic 1912 blast is known interchangeably as the Katmai or the Nova Rupta explosion. No single volcanic eruption since one in Greece 1500 BC is known to have displaced more volcanic matter. 80 miles southeast of the blast site on Kodiak Island, Alaska, it is still being talked about almost a century later.
I remember my mother just telling me how black it was, dark, for 7 days, you know.
7 days?
7 days.
Wow.
Lifelong Kodiak resident and village elder Thomas Frost Jr. has heard about the historic explosion all of his life.
Well, see, the wind was blowing from the west, so if it was blowing the other way, it would have went to Japan.
A bright summer day on Kodiak Island suddenly vanished behind a black cloud of ash, captured approaching the island in this photo by a Kodiak mailman who was on a boat.
On June 6, 1912, at about 1 p.m., there was a large blast that was heard as far away as Cordova.
To put it in your perspective, if the eruption happened in New York City, people in Chicago could hear the eruption.
On the island itself, there were about 500 inhabitants preparing for the commercial salmon fishing season, and they were literally engulfed in darkness as this ash continued to fall.
Thunder and lightning, almost unheard of here on Kodiak Island and in this part of the world, arrived ahead of the ash cloud. For one 60-hour stretch, the cloud was so dense, the area was plunged into total darkness. It was said you could hold a lantern up at the end of your arm and not even see it.
Kodiak native and Harvard PhD, Dr. Sven Hawkinson.
I mean, can you imagine having your entire world just covered in ash?
No.
And no contact, and not knowing where it's coming from, because there's no volcanic activity here on the island.
When we dig in the ground here down through the last 10,000 years of record, The Katmai is the largest that we see, and there are only a half a dozen or so that are similar to it in the last 10,000 years. And the most recent of those is about 3,000 years or a little more.
This is just a wonderful marker for us as archaeologists because it's so clear, it's so distinct, and so well documented.
The volcanic ash was everywhere. It even penetrated walls. Imagine being inside, as this piano was at the time, and having the ash pile up to a depth of 4 feet against it.
Volcanic ash is blasted rock particles. It's about the size of baking flour. It's highly abrasive. It's not like ash in your fireplace, which is carbon.
If you look at it under a microscope, it looks like broken light bulbs.
Kodiak residents have been treated to the full array of natural forces which shape Alaska. In 1964, Kodiak Island, just like Seward on the Alaska mainland, was swamped by tsunamis.
The highest waves were about 18 feet above regular sea level, and the lowest troughs were considerably more than that. In fact, the bay virtually drained.
Reports of water draining from harbors and coastlines just before tsunamis are common.
And I never believed it unless I saw it with my own eyes. I looked down there, the channel was dry. There wasn't a bit of water in there. And a few minutes later, here comes the water from the other direction, and the channel's full again.
The 1964 tsunamis shocked unsuspecting coastal communities all over Alaska, and years before the Sumatran quake and tsunami gave the world a taste of one of nature's true horrors. It had to be the same nearly a century ago as the ash cloud enveloped Kodiak Island. In an era before air travel or sophisticated communication systems, residents weren't even aware there was a volcano close enough to affect them, especially one powerful enough to level 40 square miles. The scars are still visible on the landscape today. For decades after the blast, vents spewed steam and gas into the air at the Novarupta site.
It's unfortunate, but the Valley of 10,000 Smokes no longer smokes.
But even after a natural catastrophe of this magnitude, ecosystems bounce back in amazing ways. One of the world's largest concentrations of bears in the wild are here, following the salmon which swim upstream near the Novarupta blast site. And when they eat too much, they dig into deep deposits of volcanic ash for its medicinal value.
The bears use it just like kaopectate that we use it for. They'll dig into the ash for the upset stomachs, eat it, and hopefully help their stomach problems.
It started as a tsunami special. Little did we think we'd see anything like this.
Oh, you got it.
NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is the U.S. government's oldest scientific agency, with roots stretching back to the early 1800s. In 1970, these divisions came together to form one overarching agency, NOAA. Today, NOAA's work reaches from the bottom of the sea to the surface of the sun, and it touches every aspect of our daily lives. We divide the ocean into many parts: Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, Arctic. But it's really just one big ocean. The same is true of NOAA. Together, the thousands of people who work at NOAA take the daily pulse of our ocean and our atmosphere. They join forces to save lives, safeguard property, and protect our environment. From weather to charting to fisheries, each unit is just one piece of a greater whole. Together, they make one NOAA.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the marine forecast for southeast Alaska for tomorrow. In the outside waters, look for northeasterly winds 15 knots with 4-foot seas. For the most part, as you get up towards the eastern Gulf there, look for northerly winds 10 knots with 4-foot seas. Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay, look for 35-knot northerly winds, 7-foot seas. The inside waters, northeasterly winds 15 knots with gusts to 40 knots with seas to 4 feet. As we move in towards Monday's forecast, look for the inside waters. They should drop down quite a bit to northeast about 10 knots. The Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay now northerly winds 20 knots with 4-foot seas. Pretty much really not much change except for with a slight wind direction shift to the northwest as you get along the coastal waters there. Now I'm over towards the western Gulf there. We'll start over towards Middleton Island and look for northerly winds about 10 knots. Northerly winds pretty much also for the most part as you get just basically Cape Suckley-Nagore Point. And then as we get all through the Barren Islands, look for northwesterly winds 25 knots. With as you get southeast of the Barrens, about 7 feet or so. Northwesterly winds 15 knots over towards Shelikof Strait and Kodiak Island waters, and light winds for the most part over in Cook Inlet area. And Seward will probably see some northerly winds 15 knots with some 3-foot seas and light and variable winds over the Prince William Sound area. Now, as you get in towards Monday's forecast, look for light and variable winds in Prince William Sound as along the northern Gulf there. Light winds continuing as we get over in the Cook Inlet area, light winds over towards the Resurrection Bay. And as we get over towards west of the Barren Islands, look for variable winds, 10 knots or so. Westerly winds now southeast of the Barrens at about 15 knots with 4-foot seas. And southwesterly winds 20 knots over Shelikof Strait and out towards the waters towards Kodiak Islands. The seas are 5 to 6 feet or so. Now along the Alaska Peninsula for tomorrow, we'll start towards the western end. Look for southeasterly winds 25 knots, 6 feet north of the Alaska Peninsula, 10 feet to the south there. As we get over towards the eastern portion of the Alaska Peninsula, look for northwesterly winds at 15 knots of 6-foot seas and light and variable winds for the most part over in Bristol Bay. And Monday's forecast, now as they approach that next frontal system, our strong frontal system coming up, we'll see the winds bump up to about 35 knots out of the northeast over in Bristol Bay with 5-foot seas and ice-free waters. South of the Alaska Peninsula, look for east to southeast winds, 35 to 40 knots with seas 12 to 18 feet. And then just north there, look for easterly winds 40 knots with 8-foot seas. Now for the Aleutians for tomorrow, we got a lot going on here. But for the most part, you can see generally south of the chain here, look for southeasterly winds 50 to 55 knots of seas, anywhere from 18 feet in the eastern sections to the western sections. Look for 23 feet. To the north of the chain there, kind of easterly storms, seas, anywhere from 14 feet on the eastern end to 22 feet in the central sections. And then as you get a little bit in the central section, look for southerly winds about 45 knots to 20-foot seas, and in the far west, easterly winds 45 knots with 21-foot seas. Now, for Monday's forecast in the west now, we'll see as that low pressure kind of moves north, it kind of, the front kind of wraps around, so the winds will become northerly in the western sections, 40 knots to 20-foot seas. The central sections, for the most part, 25 knots south winds with 6-foot seas. And, it's probably closer, I would say, probably to 10-foot seas there. And then we're going to see still a pretty good swell, about 18-foot swell south of the chain there with southerly winds for the most part. And then winds becoming more kind of southeasterly north on the Pacific side there, anywhere from 20 to 30 knots of seas, anywhere from 10 to 11 feet or so. And now for the eastern portion of the Bering Sea, look for easterly winds 35 knots towards the Pribilof Islands with 8-foot seas. St. Matthew Island waters, easterly winds 30 knots with 4-foot seas and ice-free waters, and just 10 knots along the southwest coast there, 15-knot westerly winds as you get up towards St. Lawrence Island. And then on Monday's forecast, strong east to northeast winds everywhere for the most part, 40 knots towards Pribilof Islands, 15-foot seas. St. Matthew Island water is 40 knots, and then 40 knots in the southern sections just south of Nunivak Island, and then 30 knots to the north there. And then continuing further north, generally we're looking for Wales, Cape Thompson, southerly winds 10 knots, and along the Arctic coast 10 to 15 knot easterly winds, and that pretty much kind of holds through the Monday time frame. Quick wrap up around the state, generally fair skies over the mainland, a few clouds over southeast Alaska. Most of the action is going to, as we saw in the Marines, is going to be out to the west there with the approach of this next storm. We'll kind of move this in motion for Sunday's forecast. With storm coming in, mixture of rain and snow with very strong winds, which you saw in the Marines on the backside. We'll see some rain showers, fair skies over the mainland areas, except for some fog along the coastal areas. And moving in towards Monday's forecast, we'll see the rain moving north with snow and blowing snow along the southwest coast in Bristol Bay with some rain showers on the backside. Well, that's all we have for tonight. Have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, Alaska's pipeline to the future, delivering oil today, sustaining operations for tomorrow, committed to safety, operating the 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline since 1977.